You're no one now. Just the old lady in the way. Rachel said it like she was stating the weather. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. I just felt cold. Not from the spring breeze through the open window, but from something deeper, like a door quietly shutting inside my chest. We were still cleaning out Henry's closet. I hadn't even packed away his cologne bottle. It still smelled like him, cedar and quiet evenings. Brian didn't say a word. He stood there, arms folded, staring at the floor like a child waiting out a storm. But this wasn't weather. This was erasure. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or ask, after all these years, was I just wallpaper now? Something you peel off to repaint the house? Rachel kept going. The land's not being used. No crops. No cattle. It's just sitting there dead. That word. Dead. She said it like it meant opportunity. She didn't see what I saw when I looked out that window. She didn't see Henry's hands, sunburned and cracked, planting those sycamores. She didn't hear Brian's laughter at 5, chasing the dog through wet soil. She didn't feel the weight of my own body, 6 months pregnant, hauling buckets because the pipes burst and Henry had the flu. She didn't see anything that mattered. Brian finally looked at me. "Mom," he said gently, "maybe it's time." Time? Time for what? To stop pretending this was still my home. To accept that motherhood has an expiration date. I swallowed hard. My mouth tasted like damp wool. "You know," I said softly, "there was a time I used to read to you right here." Right where Rachel's standing. His eyes darted away. I turned to her. "That rug you're standing on. Brian wet himself there when he was 2. I held him all night while he cried. Fever of 103. You weren't here for that, Rachel. You didn't see him shiver." Her face tightened. "This isn't about the past, Dolores. We're trying to plan the future. My future was buried last week. You don't get another one at 74. Not really. Not when your husband's gone and your son's turned into a stranger with his wife's words in his mouth." I looked at the kitchen table, scratched from decades of meals, arguments, and birthday candles. I remembered Henry nailing it back together after Brian cracked it during a tantrum. He said, "If wood can be mended, so can hearts." He was wrong. Brian said nothing. Not one word to defend me. That silence, it echoed louder than Rachel's cruelty. I nodded, slowly, like my neck was made of stone. "I see." I turned and walked toward the hallway. Rachel called after me, "Don't take it personal. We're just being practical. Practical. That's what they call it when love is too inconvenient." I sat on the edge of my bed, legs trembling. My hands went to the drawer, the old one Henry built with uneven rails. I knew what was inside: an envelope. His handwriting still bold af. "Open only if they forget who you are." See, I traced the letters. They had forgotten. Or maybe they never knew. The envelope remained where I left it, still sealed, still waiting. But my hands reached instead for something softer, an old photo album, tucked beneath Henry's flannel shirts. The fabric still held the scent of him, faint as breath on a window pane. I carried the album to the bed and sat slowly, careful not to disturb the stillness of the room. My knees protested. My heart ached more. The cover had once been navy. Now it was tired blue, edges curled like dried petals. I opened it. Page 1, our wedding, 1968. Henry's tie was crook. My veil was slipping. We looked like 2 kids playing dress up. But his eyes, they were steady. He whispered that night, "I'll build you a home, Dolores." Not a house, a home, he did. The next page held Brian at 3. His knees stained green, peanut butter smeared across one cheek, one sock on, one missing. His eyes wild with joy. I could still feel the weight of him on my hip, warm and wiggling. The way he'd press his little palms to my cheeks and say, "Don't go, Mama." I turned the page. The kitchen. Before we repainted. Yellow wallpaper curling at the corners. My handwriting taped to the fridge. "Spelling test Friday, don't forget." I used to iron his shirts, sew patches on jeans, and slice apples into shapes for his lunchbox. He liked hearts best. I memorized his footsteps. Knew the sound of his door creaking open when he had a bad dream. There was one winter, he was 6, fevered and flushed, eyes glassy, lips trembling. I held him all night, rocking by the fire, whispering the lullaby my mother once sang to me. When dawn came, his fever broke. He fell asleep on my chest. Now he looked through me like a shadow. Rachel talked about land and listings, but I saw years, Christmases, arguments, forgiveness, first steps, burnt dinners, laughter. They saw 4 acres. I saw a life. I paused at a photo. Brian in a paper crown. His 5th birthday. Henry had built that toy train by hand. The cake leaned hard to the left. We sang loud, off-key, terrible. But Brian beamed like a king. That boy trusted me. He used to trust me. How do you raise a child with your whole heart and then watch him stand beside silence while his wife writes you off? I pressed my palm to that image. Not to remember, but to hold something that hadn't yet let me go. The photo slid from my lap and landed on the floor, face down. I didn't move to pick it up. Instead, I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the wind outside fill the quiet. It rustled the old trees we planted in our first spring here. Trees Henry watered by hand when the well dried out, refusing to let them wither. I thought of his voice, soft but firm. Everything worth keeping takes time. I missed that voice more than I missed breath. One afternoon, not long after our 40th anniversary, Henry had called me to the porch. He looked tired but calm. He held a worn envelope in his hands. "Don't open this," he said gently. "Lest they forget who you are." I laughed then. It felt too dramatic. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the horizon. "A reminder that you matter, even when you're treated like you don't." That envelope had been in my drawer ever since. I hadn't thought about it much until now. I opened my eyes. Everything in the room looked the same, yet different. The quilt folded at the foot of the bed. The wooden cross above the door. The lamp Henry fixed with duct tape years ago when Brian knocked it over. Back then, broken things were worth fixing. Now, I was the thing they wanted to discard. Rachel's words echoed in my mind like a stone dropped in a well. "You're no one now." She didn't know me, she never cared to. But Brian, he did once. He knew the woman who taught him how to tie his shoes, who stayed up all night helping him finish a science project, because he forgot until Sunday evening. The woman who read every note from his teachers, who baked cupcakes for his class on his birthday. He knew me, and yet, he said nothing. That silence, it hurt more than Rachel's voice ever could. I rose from the bed slowly. My body moved like it belonged to someone else. Each step to the drawer felt heavy, like walking underwater. I pulled it open. The envelope was there, exactly where I left it. His handwriting on the front, just one word to Dolores and no instructions, no warnings. Just my name like a tether back to myself. I didn't open it. Not yet, but I held it close. For the first time in days, I breathed without shaking. Not because I had answers, but because I remembered. I was not the woman they said I was. I was the woman Henry believed in. I wasn't invited. Brian never called. Rachel didn't bother. But I showed up anyway. The town's tax office hadn't changed in 30 years. Same flickering light over the entrance, same dusty window blinds. I sat on a cold plastic chair near the corner, hands folded tight in my lap. My purse rested on my knees. Inside, the envelope Henry had left. Rachel was already there. She wore high heels too sharp for this dusty floor. Her lips were glossed, her voice loud and polished. She chatted with the receptionist like she owned the building. Brian stood behind her, quiet as a shadow. Rachel glanced at me once. No nod. No smile. Just a flicker of her eyes, like stepping over something on the sidewalk. I lowered my gaze. The receptionist disappeared into the back. Rachel turned to Brian. "It's sad, really," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Some folks don't know when to let go." Brian didn't reply. Her voice rose just enough. "Dragging out the inevitable doesn't make it easier. It makes it pathetic." My ears burned. I focused on a smudge on the floor tile. It looked like a footprint. Faded, stepped over again and again. "Like me." Rachel pulled out her phone, scrolled casually. "We're not here to be cruel," she said, now facing me directly, her tone honeyed. "But some people confuse sentiment with ownership." She smiled. I didn't. Henry's name was on every wall of that home. His hands had built it. His breath had filled it. And mine, for over 5 decades. But she was erasing all that with a smirk and a realtor's card. The door opened. A man in a navy blazer stepped out. "Mrs. Whitaker?" he said. We both answered. Rachel stepped forward quickly. "Rachel Whitaker," she clarified, shaking his hand with a practiced grip. "My husband's mother has joined us today. She's between arrangements." Between arrangements. As if I were furniture waiting for pickup. I stood slowly, my knees stiff, my throat tighter. The lawyer looked at me, then at Rachel, then back again. He gestured politely toward a conference room. I walked past Rachel. She didn't move, just whispered low and sweet. "This'll be quick." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The room smelled like dust and old coffee. A long table, 6 chairs, and a single folder in the center. I sat at the far end. My fingers found the edge of my purse again. The envelope was still there, still unopened, still waiting, just like me. Rachel crossed her legs, the click of her heel echoing in the quiet. "I just want to be efficient." She began, placing her phone face down beside the folder. Time is precious. For everyone. The lawyer nodded, opening the file. We're here to review remaining estate matters for Mr. Henry Whitaker, as noted. Rachel cut in. We've already spoken with the broker. The property's current value is over market, and since there's no mortgage, it's really the best time to sell. The lawyer blinked. S's. Whitaker Dolores is still listed as a resident on record. Rachel smiled. Temporarily, she's transitioning. Brian and I are helping her settle into something smaller, more manageable. Her words were velvet-lined poison. The kind that sounds generous unless you listen closely. I sat still, palms damp, the envelope pressed against my ribs inside my purse. A quiet presence, like a heartbeat. Rachel leaned back. We've also scheduled a cleaning crew. There's a lot of clutter in the back shed. Old tools, paperwork. Most of it's probably expired anyway. My throat tightened. Those expired papers were Henry's blueprints, his ledger notes. Handwritten lists of seed rotation from seasons he planted with love, not profit. Rachel didn't pause. And Brian has agreed that streamlining the inheritance is best. Keeping things simple, clean. Brian nodded, didn't speak, didn't look at me, just nodded, as if I were another file in the cabinet. The lawyer turned to me. Mrs. Whitaker, do you have any comments? My mouth opened. Nothing came out. Rachel's chair creaked. We understand change is hard. But sometimes holding on too tight becomes selfish. Nostalgia isn't a plan. I looked at her then, really looked. The way her jaw tensed when I didn't flinch. The way her fingers tapped the table. Fast, uneven. She expected me to break. I didn't. I looked at Brian. His eyes met mine for half a second, then dropped. I wanted to scream. To remind him who taught him how to read, who walked beside him to school in the rain, who stayed awake sewing a Halloween costume because the store one was too itchy. Instead, I said nothing. But I reached into my purse and laid my hand on the envelope. No one noticed. But I did. It was still there, still waiting, like Henry had known this moment would come. I didn't open it. Not yet. But I let my fingers curl around its edge, not for comfort, for strength. And as Rachel kept talking, her voice filling the air with polished cruelty, I sat straighter. Not taller, but firmer, like roots beneath the floor. I didn't cry in the car. I drove back with the window cracked open, letting October wind slice through the silence. The fields blurred past, brown, dry familiar. The gravel crunched as I pulled into the driveway. The house stood still as if holding its breath. Inside, I moved on autopilot, coat on the hook, shoes beside the bench. I headed to the drawer in the living room cabinet. That's where we kept the old checkbooks, tax records, Henry's letters from the co-op bank. I wasn't planning to dig, just organize. I pulled the drawer open. Familiar folders, yellow tabs. The one labeled Farm Reserve Savings caught my eye. It had Henry's handwriting, crooked but steady. I opened it. The last monthly statement sat on top. Balance of 38th WUV. I blinked. That account had over 40,000 when Henry passed. We never touched it except for emergencies, tractor repairs, roof leaks. And we always left a cushion for the future. I flipped through the pages. My hands stiffened. 3 large withdrawals, all within the last 9 months, or 10,000, 12,500, then 17,000. My name was still printed on the statements. Co-owner, primary signer. But stapled to the last page was a scanned authorization, one I didn't remember signing. I squinted at the signature. It wasn't mine, not quite forged, just practiced, close enough to pass if no one looked too hard, and beside it, Rachel's name. I dropped the paper. It floated to the carpet, soft as ash. The room seemed to contract around me. Smaller, airless. I reached for the banker's card at the bottom of the folder, faded ink. The same man Henry always spoke to, Daniel Blake. He once sent us Christmas cards. I stood slowly, as if the floor might give. My knees locked. My throat burned. I pressed my hand to my chest, not from panic, from betrayal. This wasn't a slap. It wasn't a cruel joke in a waiting room. This was theft signed, filed, processed. Done. I sat on the armrest of Henry's old chair. My purse slid to the floor. The envelope inside rustled slightly. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I was still watching the papers scattered on the rug. Numbers? Names. A signature that wasn't mine, but tried to be. I thought of all the years Henry and I scraped to build that cushion. Selling tomatoes from the roadside, stretching leftovers. Fixing what broke instead of buying new. And now, gone, no warning, no conversation. Just gone. I parked outside the credit union just after lunch. The autumn sun felt too bright, almost mocking. I sat in the car for a moment, watching my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look angry, just emptied out. Inside, the branch looked the same. Beige carpet, faint smell of ink and plastic. A young man at the counter greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm here to speak with Daniel Blake," I said quietly. He paused. "Mr. Blake retired in June. I can get his replacement." I nodded. Minutes later, a woman in a gray blouse appeared. Early 40s, kind eyes. She introduced herself, Maria, and led me into a small glass office. "How can I help, Mrs. Whitaker?" I handed her the folder. She scanned the statement, then the attached authorization. Her lips parted slightly.
I see.
She didn't rush. She didn't dismiss.
I just need to know.
I said, voice low, how this was allowed without my consent. Maria turned her screen toward me. Clicked through a few windows. "The power of attorney was updated 10 months ago," she said softly. "It lists Brian Whitaker as the acting agent. His signature is here." She turned the screen fully. Brian's name, my own son, signed, stamped, valid, no call, no warning, no conversation. "I understand this is difficult," Maria said gently. "We always recommend notifying all parties, but if the documents are in order." I nodded. She handed the papers back slowly, like returning something fragile. Outside, I walked to the car like I was wearing someone else's shoes. By the time I reached the house, the wind had picked up. Dry leaves chased each other across the porch. Inside, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the kitchen table. It creaked beneath my elbows. The folder lay open before me. Brian's signature stared back. I didn't cry. There was no sound inside me left to break. I reached for my purse and pulled out the envelope. Henry's handwriting, still clean, still steady. I placed it in front of me, ran a finger along the seal. For weeks, I'd carried it like a shield now. It felt more like a key. I didn't open it. But I looked at it, really looked, and whispered, "They're not just taking the farm, Henry. They're taking you." Silence answered, but something inside me shifted. Not rage. Not revenge. Just clarity. It was no longer about saving what was ours. It was about remembering who I still was, and what I refused to let them erase. I waited until dusk. Something about the dim light made it easier to dial the number, as if shadows could soften whatever came next. Brian answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice was casual, almost rushed. I swallowed hard. "Brian, I was at the bank today." Silence. Then okay, I saw the authorization forms. More silence. I could almost hear his jaw tighten on the other end. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He sighed. "The kind that stretches longer than it should. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. It's our savings. It was just sitting there, Mom." That word was, like it belonged to someone else now. It wasn't yours to take. It wasn't theft. He snapped, then softened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The sentence landed with a dull thud. Harder than it needs to be. As if I were the complication. Not the loss. Not the lie. Me. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. My knuckles white. "You forged my signature, Brian. It was a favor, okay?" Rachel said it'd help keep things organized. Organized for the house? For the estate? We're trying to plan ahead? Without me? A beat, then he said it. Quiet. Almost apologetic. "We didn't think you'd understand." I blinked. All those nights at the kitchen table, helping with homework, talking through his college applications, walking him through his first tax return. I didn't understand. "Rachel thinks this place is too much for you," he added. "It's not about punishment. It's just time."
Time.
Time for what? Time to forget I ever mattered? Time to move me aside like a piece of old furniture? "I'm still alive," I whispered. "I know, Mom. But come on, this doesn't have to be a fight. I didn't say anything." Because it already was. Not loud, not with fists or shouting, but a fight nonetheless. A quiet erasure, a redirection of rights, a rewriting of love. "I have to go," Brian said. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, phone still warm in my hand. Across from me, Henry's photo leaned against the window sill. He was smiling in it. Arms slung around my shoulders, his hat tilted back just slightly. I stared at it. Then said aloud, "They don't see me anymore, Henry." The wind creaked through the shutters, and I sat in a house I'd built my whole life around, wondering if anyone still saw the woman who once filled it. I called again. 3 rings. Then voicemail. Brian's voice sounded colder in the recording. Less like my son, more like a stranger managing tasks. I hung up, waited, called again. Still nothing. I placed the phone face down on the table. The kitchen clock ticked in steady judgment. It was 8:43 p.m. Outside, the wind had died, but the silence inside felt louder than before. I reached for the landline out of habit, then let my hand drop. There was no one else to call. No sister. No parents. Friends from church had stopped checking in after the funeral. Everyone thought I needed space. They had no idea what a space really meant when the world stopped saying your name. I stood, wandered into the living room. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, reminding me that I existed. I sat on the edge of the couch, looked around, same photos, same curtains, same everything. But I felt like a guest, a ghost visiting her own life. The phone buzzed. Just once I picked it up without thinking. One message. From Ethan. Hey, Miss Dolores. Just wanted to say, thanks again for the cookies last week. And you're still you. Hope today's okay. My hand flew to my mouth. Not to cry. To hold in the sound I almost made. That quiet gasp of being seen. Ethan was 15, a good kid. Used to wave when he passed on his bike. I taught his older brother 10 years ago. He remembered me as Miss Dolores, the one who told him books were time machines and made cinnamon tea after snow days. And somehow tonight, in all that emptiness, he remembered me, not the burden, not the leftover, not the complicated file in someone's estate plan.
Just me.
I stared at the message again. You're still you. Such a small sentence. But it landed where nothing else had.
Not in my mind, in my bones.
I sat back, let the phone rest on my lap, closed my eyes, and whispered into the room, not to anyone in particular, just to the night itself. I'm still me. The radiator clicked softly. The ceiling groaned with wind, and I let my shoulders fall for the first time in days. Not from defeat, from a strange, surprising relief. I hadn't disappeared. Someone still saw me, even if it wasn't the person I gave my life to. Even if it was just one sentence, from a boy with kindness in his thumbs. It was enough to make the silence feel less cruel, enough to sit still with myself and not feel entirely alone. Rachel said it would be good for me. Some fresh air, new faces. She said it like a favor, not an invitation. Before we left, she handed me a cardigan from the upstairs closet. Oversized, faded lavender, still smelled like mothballs and someone else's perfume. I didn't ask where we were going. I just sat in the passenger seat, hands folded, the road stretched out like a question no one wanted to answer. We pulled into a cul-de-sac, neatly trimmed lawns, string lights draped across the backyard like artificial stars. People laughing behind plastic wine glasses. Rachel fixed her hair in the mirror, checked her lipstick, then glanced at me. Just try not to make things weird, okay? Smile a little. I nodded. That was all I could offer. At the party, she took Brian's hand. He barely looked my way. This is Dolores, Rachel said, turning to a small group. She's staying with us for a little while. Family stuff. No one asked what kind. No one asked my last name. Not, this is my mother-in-law. Not, this is Brian's mom. A not, she taught algebra for 30 years. Just someone staying. A pause. Smiles. Then conversation slid elsewhere. Someone's baby shower. New patio furniture. A friend's daughter made the dean's list. I hovered near the drink table. The lemonade was too sweet. The tablecloth had sunflowers a little too bright. No one made eye contact. One woman nodded politely, then turned to refill her drink before I could respond. The space around me widened. Even in a crowd, silence can feel like a spotlight. I stepped back, closer to the fence line, a quieter place, one where I could listen without being seen. From there, I could hear them better. Rachel's doing so much lately. Is that Brian's mom? I thought she moved away. Oh, she's just there for now. Temporary, I think. Temporary. I took another sip of lemonade. It burned. Not from the citrus, from the knowing. Brian stood by the fire pit. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. He laughed, comfortable, rooted. He didn't look at me once. Not even when a man asked, "So who's the lady in the purple sweater?" Rachel didn't miss a beat. "Oh, someone staying with us for a bit?" Long story? That word again, someone. A placeholder. A guest in a life I helped build. My throat tightened. I turned to walk. Away from the voices. Away from the firelight. Toward a corner of the yard shaded by hedges. There, under the string lights that didn't quite reach, I let my hands shake. Only for a moment. Then I steadied them. I breathed in, out, and smiled. Not out of joy. Not to be polite, but because they'd forgotten. They'd forgotten who I was. Who I still am. And that was their mistake. Because I wasn't just someone. I was Dolores Whitaker. And I was no longer afraid of being invisible. I was watching, listening, and waiting. The drive home was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that heals. The kind that scrapes. Rachel hummed along to the radio. Something soft. Something upbeat. It clashed against the weight in my chest. She finally broke the silence near the intersection. You know, you didn't have to look so stiff all night. I glanced out the window. It was a party, Dolores. Not a funeral. I said nothing. Rachel sighed dramatically. People notice these things, you know. Brian's boss was there. His wife, too. You could have smiled. The light turned red. The car stopped. I kept my hands folded in my lap. They're trying to help you, Rachel added. We are. Letting you stay with us. Feeding you. Including, like a guest. Like a favor. The light turned green. I didn't say a word the rest of the drive. Brian pulled into the driveway. Didn't look at me as I opened the door. He turned the ignition off, sat there in the dark, staring ahead like the windshield had something to explain. Inside the house, Rachel went straight upstairs. I walked slower. Through the hallway, past the photo of Henry and me on our anniversary. His arm around my shoulders, my smile frozen in time. In the guest room, my new room, I sat on the edge of the bed. I took off the cardigan, folded it once, set it on the chair, then opened the nightstand drawer. It creaked softly. I reached beneath the stack of hand towels. My fingers brushed something hard, cold, familiar. The small brass key. Henry had slipped it to me once after a storm, when the power went out and we needed our documents. Just in case, he'd said. You always remember where we put things. I held the key in my palm. It looked smaller than I remembered, but heavier. I stared at it for a long time, then closed my fingers around it. No one had seen me at that party. Not really, not as a person. They saw a placeholder. A name they didn't bother to learn. A woman folded into silence. But I wasn't finished. I stood, moved to the dresser, opened a second drawer, pulled out the small fabric pouch where I used to keep old receipts and letters. I slipped the key inside, then zipped it shut. I didn't need to open the safe tonight. Just knowing I could that I still had something locked away, something mine was enough. For now. I turned off the light, laid back on the bed. The house creaked, pipes groaned somewhere in the walls. But inside me a stillness settled. Not peace. Not yet, but resolve. If they wouldn't remember who I was, I'd remind them. The next morning, the house was silent. Rachel's car was already gone. Brian's briefcase sat by the door, untouched. He was still upstairs. I made tea in the kitchen. Cinnamon and clove, something Henry used to steep during long winters. The scent brought a pressure behind my eyes. I didn't sit down. Instead, I walked toward the old cabinet in the living room. The one Henry called, or archive. A name far too grand for what was inside boxes of bills, expired insurance. A few yellowed photos. I opened the doors. The wood groaned. There, in the second drawer, lay a pile of envelopes. I pulled them out one by one, flipping through quietly. Electric mortgage. Health. Then I saw it. An old photo, Henry standing beside his older brother, Paul. Both smiling, squinting against a summer sky. Behind them the barn, the one that no longer stood. I traced Henry's face with my finger. He looked young, proud, still building something. My chest ached with a memory I hadn't summoned in years. The year Paul got sick, Henry sat at this very table flipping through paperwork. If Paul goes before us, he said, we should buy out his share, keep the land whole. For Brian, for the school kids, for you. I had nodded, thinking it would never happen, but it had, and Henry did what he said he would. He bought Paul's share. Quietly, through a cooperative title transfer. I signed the last paper with a blue pen, not knowing then it made me the sole legal owner. That was 2 decades ago. The barn's gone now, Paul's long buried. And the documents, I pushed deeper into the cabinet, lifted an old shoebox. Inside were cards from students, birthday notes, a crumpled receipt from our first TV, and under it all a folded packet. Thick paper, official seal. I sat on the carpet, fingers trembling just slightly. When I opened the envelope, I saw it. Deed of transfer 2003, owner Dolores Whitaker, Whitaker Farm, parcel 2 of 243 acres, my name. Typed in black ink, firm and final. Not shared. Not inherited, mine. My breath caught. Not in pride. In grief. Grief for the years I'd let myself forget this. For the silence I swallowed while they treated me like air. I ran my hand across the page. I remembered now. The way Henry smiled after the notary appointment. The way he said, this land is yours now, Dory. Even if the world forgets, you'll have this. I had forgotten. But not anymore. I pressed the page to my chest, closed my eyes, and felt something shift, not in the room, but in me. I didn't tell anyone what I found. Not Rachel. Not Brian. Not even the mirror above the dresser. I folded the deed and slipped it into the inside pocket of my cardigan, the one they never noticed I wore twice. The paper felt warm against my chest. Later that afternoon, when the house emptied again, I stepped outside. No one asked where I was going. No one cared. The wind was soft. The air held a hint of cut grass and soil, sharp, clean grounding. I walked past the side gate. It creaked like it always had. Henry never did fix that hinge, no matter how many times I asked. Said the sound helped him know I was coming. Beyond the fence, the field opened wide bare, overgrown in patches, but still ours. Mine, I stepped into the field slowly, letting my shoes sink into the dirt. The ground held memory, boots, tires, 100 Sunday walks. Each step whispered something back. There was the broken trellis where I once grew roses, Henry's favorite, the deep red ones. The stump where he chopped firewood every fall. The patch where I taught 6th graders how to count tree rings in science class. These weren't just corners of land. They were pieces of us. I reached the edge of the clearing. A line of cedar trees stood tall. Older than the house, older than all of us. Henry said they were here when his father was a boy. He called them the Sentinels. I stood there still. Above, a hawk circled once, then disappeared beyond the clouds. I closed my eyes not to escape, but to feel. Feel the land under my soles. Feel the wind on my face. Feel the weight of the paper tucked close to my skin. For years I'd let silence grow around me like moss. I thought that was grace. Dignity. But grace doesn't mean vanishing. Dignity doesn't mean being erased. And silence, when forced, is just another kind of cage. I opened my eyes again. The barn was gone. But the foundation still marked the earth, stone by stone, just like the law. They could talk over me, laugh at me, forget my name in rooms full of wine and polite lies, but they couldn't change what was filed in ink, signed before witnesses, notarized and sealed. They couldn't rewrite land deeds with whispers. I remembered the time Henry brought home that notary slip. His hands were calloused, and he handed me a pen like it was a gift. "This land is yours now, Dory," he had said, "even if no one else sees it." And for a long time, not even I did. But I do now, I breathed in. Slow, deep. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. For the first time in a long time, I saw the road ahead not as a struggle, but as a strategy. I would not fight them with noise. I would not beg for respect. I would remind them with paper, with proof, with quiet power that doesn't shake, but stands. And when the time came, I would be ready. I didn't sleep that night. The house creaked and sighed as old houses do, as if remembering what it used to be. The hallway light flickered once. Somewhere in the distance, a pipe let out a sharp clink. I didn't move from the window seat. I had a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Not for warmth, but for weight. The pressure kept me anchored. Outside, the yard was soaked in silver. Moonlight poured over the field like a quiet truth. The trees barely stirred. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I held a mug of tea in both hands, lukewarm now. But I hadn't sipped it in an hour. Instead, I stared out across the dark outline of the field, watching shadows drift across the old cedar line. In that stillness, Henry's voice came back clear, as if he were sitting right beside me. People forget words, Dory, but they remember land. He said it the night we got the deed back from the notary. I'd been anxious, worried we were doing something selfish, cutting out Paul's boys. But Henry had just placed the folder in my lap, gently, and smiled. "They'll have their lives," he'd said. "But you built this." He'd known even then. He'd known they wouldn't see me. He'd known I'd need something more than memory to survive Erasure. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. I leaned forward, set the cold mug down on the windowsill, and reached for the drawer beside the chair. Inside a leather notebook, faded at the corners, smelled of old paper and lavender, I opened to a blank page and began to write. Not thoughts. Actions. Call Linda at County Records. Get certified copy of 2003 transfer. Schedule private consult with real estate attorney. Pull Brian's property title. Check for liens or shared assets. Review Henry's will again. Note clause about intent. I paused. Wrote one more line. Do not tell them. Not yet. Let them underestimate me. Let them assume I'm too tired, too broken, too small. They wouldn't hear my voice, but they'd feel the paper. I flipped to the next page and wrote a new heading, Legacy, Defined. Below it, I listed things not written in ink, the students I taught for 34 years. The garden Henry and I built by hand, the books I never threw out, the quilt made from Brian's baby clothes, the name etched in stone at the county clerk's office. I closed the notebook slowly. Excellent, no fireworks. No epiphany, just clarity, sharp as a signature, and quiet as land at midnight. By 6 I was already dressed, no makeup, no perfume, just a clean blouse, my soft brown cardigan, and flats that didn't squeak on tile floors. I pinned back my hair in the mirror. Gray, thinning, but steady. I looked like someone easily overlooked, and I needed it that way. In my purse, a manila folder with the deed, 2 photocopies, my ID, a printout of the county code on inheritance transfer, and my old teacher's planner. Repurposed now, full of notes. I poured half a cup of coffee and left the rest in the pot. Didn't even wait for Rachel to come downstairs. She wouldn't ask where I was going, and I wouldn't offer it. The car still smelled like peppermint from an air freshener I'd hung last winter. I turned the key slowly. Engine sputtered, then caught. It wasn't a long drive. Just 12 minutes down to Maple Street, past the old fire station and 2 churches. But each minute felt like a return. To the woman I was before whispers, before I became someone merely staying with them. The credit union sat on the corner, red brick and small windows. It hadn't changed since Henry first brought me here in 2003. I parked by the hedge, took one deep breath, walked in. The man at the desk was young, early 30s, crisp collar, polite smile. His name tag read Carl. He didn't recognize me. That was fine. He offered me a seat. I declined. I preferred to stand. "I have a question about a recorded property deed," I said. His smile thinned a little. "Of course. May I have your name and the parcel number?" I handed him the paper. He scanned it quickly, then slower, then sat up straighter. "I see this goes back quite a while?" "Yes," I replied, 22 years. "But it's valid. It was notarized and registered properly." He nodded, pulled up a screen on his monitor, clicked through 2 pages. I watched the way his brows furrowed slightly, the way he leaned closer to the screen. "There it is," he said. "Filed June 17, 2003. Sole ownership transfer from Paul Whitaker to Dolores Whitaker." "That's you?"
That's me?
Carl looked up again. "Everything appears in order. Do you need a certified copy?" I nodded once. "Yes. And a notarized letter of confirmation." "No problem," he said.
I'll get those printed.
He left the desk, and I exhaled. Not relief, just release. I wasn't there to ask permission. I wasn't hoping to be heard. I was confirming what had always been true. Carl returned, documents in hand. I signed where he pointed. He stamped everything with a practiced motion, then handed it all back in a new folder. "Here you go, Mrs. Whitaker." He finally said my name. Not someone, not a guest, not a problem. I tucked the folder into my purse, turned toward the glass door, and stepped out into the morning light. I came home before noon. No one noticed. Rachel was on the phone pacing the hallway, talking too loudly about curtains. Brian's car wasn't in the driveway. Good. I walked straight to the back bedroom, the one they never entered, closed the door, locked it. Then I sat down at the old oak desk Henry built in '87 and pulled open the drawer. The laptop was slow to start, dust on the screen. I wiped it with the sleeve of my cardigan. When it finally loaded, I opened the banking app. The password still worked. For a second, I almost smiled. Then I saw the transaction, small at first, 200 here, 300 there, then larger. A 500 maintenance, payment. A 4,800, home upgrade. He won transfer label investment, but to an unknown account. All from the joint savings Henry and I opened 35 years ago. The same account we used to save for Brian's college, the one Henry called our legacy fund, and now being drained quietly, regularly, by my own son. I didn't gasp, didn't tremble. I just reached for a notepad and began to write. 4,800 Mar 14 transfer to unknown 2,500 Feb 9 labeled home upgrade, Thuzzard 200 Jan 22 furnace repair. I checked the balances. Then I clicked on settings, changed the password, enabled 2-step authentication, linked it to my phone number. Then I transferred every remaining dollar to a private account, one I'd opened in my name only after Henry passed, but never used. Until now. It wasn't much, but it was mine again. I logged out, opened the second drawer, pulled out a folder marked Utilities. Inside he printed copies of every bill Rachel had offered to pay on my behalf. Most were legitimate, but a few had duplicates. 2 bills for the same water line, one listed for a property I didn't recognize. I laid them out across the desk like cards in a game. Then I picked up my pen. Compare bills with county records. Call City Hall, confirm account numbers. Document every discrepancy. The room was quiet except for the faint tick of the desk clock. Outside the window, the field swayed under a soft wind. Same rhythm it had the day we buried Henry. But today I didn't look outside, I looked forward. Everything had to be precise, not dramatic, not loud. Just true, because truth doesn't shout. It waits, it builds, and then when ready it stands. By 3 o'clock I had 3 folders labeled banking, utilities, land, each one sealed, each one with a purpose. Not to fight, but to win. That evening, I stayed upstairs, lights off, door cracked just enough. Their voices carried from the kitchen. Rachel's laugh was sharp, thin, the sound of someone who thought they'd already won. "We should just list it," she said. "There's no point dragging it out." Brian murmured something I couldn't hear. Then Rachel, again, louder this time. "She'll be fine. Maybe a small apartment near the community center. Something manageable." Another pause. Anyway, once it's sold, we can finally upgrade the patio. I'm not spending another summer with that peeling wood. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. In that moment, I stopped being the woman who waited for permission. I stood up, went to the closet, pulled out my leather bag and laid it flat on the bed. Then, from the desk drawer, I took the 3 folders: banking, utilities. I placed them neatly inside, zippered it shut, and walked to the window. Outside, the barn light flickered once, then went dark. The sensor must have tripped. Or maybe it was just the wind again. I looked down at my hands, no tremble, just stillness. Then I reached for the rotary phone still sitting by the nightstand. The one Henry insisted we keep, in case the world goes sideways. It clicked when I dialed. I remembered the number by heart. McAllister Law, extension 2, the line rang twice. Then a voice, familiar, gruff. James McAllister speaking. It's Dolores Whitaker. A pause. Then Dolores. It's been a while. I need to schedule a review, I said. Regarding a deed, a transfer, and a few discrepancies. I assume this isn't for casual reading? No, another pause. Then, come in Monday. I'll clear the 10 o'clock slot. Thank you? That was it. No long explanations, no apologies, just action. I hung up the phone and stood for a while listening again. Rachel was humming now. Something tuneless, smug, she had no idea. And I didn't need her to. I pulled the covers down from the bed and sat. Opened the bag one more time, checked the folders again. Each page exactly where it needed to be. Stapled. Dated, labeled. Facts, not feelings. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel brave. I felt ready. That was enough. The next morning would come. They'd laugh. They'd plan. They'd continue to think I was invisible. But I knew better now. Legacy doesn't whisper. It waits, and it remembers. Have you ever stood your ground in silence? Would you fight quietly or walk away? Tell me what you'd do. Your voice matters here. They called it a family meeting. Rachel said it the night before, between dainty forkfuls of lasagna she hadn't cooked. She dabbed the corners of her mouth like a hostess. Tomorrow morning, let's sit down and talk through next steps, she said. It's time we all align. Brian said nothing. Just pushed peas around on his plate. I nodded once. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't nerves. It was something deeper. That aching awareness of being in a house that was mine, but no longer mine. Of sitting under a roof I helped pay for, beside a child I raised, and feeling invisible. By morning, I was downstairs by 9. Rachel had already claimed the head of the table. She wore a navy blazer like she was running a board meeting. The iPad was open, documents loaded. Notes were highlighted in yellow. Brian sat next to her, hands clasped tight, eyes locked on the table. Not me, I walked in quietly, sat at the far end, no folder, no coffee, just me in my cardigan, hands folded in my lap. Rachel cleared her throat. So, thank you for joining, Dolores. The way she said my name, like she was offering me a seat at a table I built. I wanted to walk through a few options for the property. We've already spoken to 2 agents. I haven't. Brian cut in, barely above a whisper. Rachel smiled through her teeth. Well, I have, and both agree that if we act quickly, we can get well above market. She turned the screen around. A mock listing, pictures of the land, my land, taken without my knowing. She kept talking. Of course. We'll make sure you receive a portion. A fair portion. It's only right. She leaned forward. So, thoughts? I didn't answer. Not right away. I reached into my cardigan, pulled out the thin envelope I'd kept close for days, slid it slowly across the table. Rachel looked confused. What's this? Certified deed, I said. Filed in 2003, notarized, full transfer of Whitaker Farm into my name. Rachel blinked. She opened the envelope, read the first line, then the second. Her lips parted. This says you own it? I do, but Brian is. This is not yours to discuss. My voice was soft, but the air shifted. Rachel's mouth opened again, then shut. Brian finally looked at me. Really looked. The iPad dimmed. No one spoke. I didn't need to say more. The paper did the speaking, and the silence. That belonged to me? Rachel stared at the deed like it was a lie made of paper. No, she whispered. Then louder. No. This isn't valid. Henry wouldn't do this without telling Brian. Her fingers curled around the page, crumpling the edge. She turned sharply toward Brian, voice rising. Say something. Brian looked stunned. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like he hadn't prepared for this moment at all. Rachel's voice cracked. Brian, she's cutting us out. You realize that, right? This is her way of pushing us off the land. He didn't answer. Just stared at the table. I could feel the weight of the room shifting. The same table we'd shared Sunday dinners around now felt cold.
Hollow.
Like the chairs themselves were bracing for the blow. "I'm not here to argue," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Just to inform." Rachel froze. The silence that followed was brutal. "I've kept this document locked away for years," I continued, "because I never thought I'd need to use it against my own family." Rachel scoffed. "Family? You think treating us like squatters is family?" I didn't answer her rage. Only the truth mattered now. "You made decisions behind closed doors," I said. "With agents. With pictures of my land. And you never asked." Rachel's nostrils flared. "Because you're not in a position to make those decisions anymore?" That was the moment. Not the shouting. Not the paper. That sentence. A knife dressed as a statement. I inhaled slowly. "Let the silence do its work. Your position doesn't decide the truth," I said softly. "The truth does." She slammed her iPad shut. The sound cracked like a gunshot across the table. Brian winced. Finally, he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "She's right." Rachel blinked. "What did you just say?" "She's right," he repeated. "Her name's on the deed. She owns it. All of it." Rachel's mouth opened, then closed again. Like a fish pulled from water, she stood, crossed her arms tightly. Unbelievable. After everything I've done. The room turned still, not peaceful, just heavy. I tapped the envelope gently. "In case you'd like to read it again." Slowly. I stood the legs of my chair, made no sound. I'd learned to rise with grace long before any of them entered this home. I looked at Brian one last time. His eyes met mine for the first time in weeks. They were glassy, not with tears, but confusion, like a child caught between loyalty and truth. "I'm still your mother," I said. That never changed, but silence has a cost. Then I walked out. No grand gesture. No slammed doors. Just the soft rhythm of my footsteps, echoing through a house they no longer controlled. The wind out back was gentler than usual. I stepped out onto the porch, wrapped my cardigan tighter, and sat on the old wooden swing Henry built 30 years ago. The boards creaked under my weight. A familiar sound. A comforting one. My fingers brushed the armrest where he used to rest his hand. In the house behind me, silence lingered. But I could still feel Rachel's fury like a storm bottled in the walls. I knew it wasn't over. Not with her, not yet. But for now, I let myself breathe. I pulled out my flip phone, the one they all teased me for still using, and scrolled to McAllister's name. He answered on the third ring. "Dolores," he said, calm as ever. "I'd like to schedule a visit," I said. "With the original deed? To make everything official? You sure?" he asked. "I'm sure," I replied. "It's time." He didn't press, just gave me a time, a day, and directions to the office downtown. I hung up and stared at the garden Henry planted. Wild rosemary, half-dug rows of beets. We'd meant to finish it before fall, but fall came early that year. My chest ached, not from sadness, but the kind of weight you carry when you've kept quiet too long. I thought of what Rachel had said. "After everything I've done." She'd worn that line like a badge. But doing everything while stepping on others isn't virtue. It's vanity. I rested my palms on my lap. The wind caught a loose strand of hair, brushed it against my cheek. I let it stay there. Inside, the house was still, but in my bones I felt movement, not from them, from years ago. Henry had looked me in the eye one night when the power was out and said, "One day, don't raise your voice. Just raise your proof." I hadn't known what he meant at the time. Now, I did. It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who you are even when everyone else forgets. The door behind me creaked. I didn't turn. Let them come to me, I thought. Let them step outside for once. Because I wasn't stepping back in. Not until respect walked out with them. The swing creaked again as I leaned back. I wasn't angry. Just done being erased. I didn't expect peace. Just space. And that they gave me. No one stopped me when I gathered my things from the guest room and moved them back into the master suite. The bed I once shared with Henry still carried the faint scent of cedar and old linen. I opened the windows wide, let the air rush in like forgiveness. For 2 days, the house went quiet, not cold, but suspended like it was holding its breath. Rachel stayed in the den, barely stepping out. I heard her pacing at night. Her heels clicked across the hardwood like a metronome of frustration. Brian didn't say much either. He came and went like a shadow. Avoided my eyes in the kitchen, left early for work, returned late. On the third evening, just after sundown, I heard a soft knock on my door. I turned off the lamp beside the bed. "Yes, it's me," Brian said. I opened the door slowly. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. The hallway light behind him cast a tired glow across his face. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. Stepped aside. He didn't sit, just hovered by the bookshelf, staring at nothing. "I didn't know," he said. "About the deed, or what Rachel planned with the agent." "I swear, I believe you," I said. He exhaled, long and shaky. "I just thought, maybe we'd figure something out as a family." Family. That word again? It used to mean dinners, traditions, planting tomatoes in spring. Now it felt like a fence with missing posts. "You watched me get erased?" I said gently. "Even if you didn't hold the pen." He flinched. "Not from volume, just truth." "I didn't know how to stop it," he whispered. Rachel gets intense. "And I thought maybe she was right. Maybe you were tired, lonely." I let the silence stretch. "Tired doesn't mean powerless," I said. He finally sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees. "I miss the way things were," he said. "When you and Dad. When it all felt simple." "It was never simple," I replied. "You just didn't see the weight I carried." Brian looked up. There was a trace of something in his face. Remorse, maybe. Or recognition. "I'm not here to shame you," I said softly. "But I can't carry this house and your silence too." He nodded. "I'll talk to her," he said. "You don't have to talk," I said. "You have to decide." The air between us held. Not angry, not healed. Just honest. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid in the same bed Henry once called home. The ceiling fan hummed overhead, soft and steady, like it had no memory of the storm outside that had once shaken the shingles loose. My hand reached instinctively to the empty side of the mattress. Cold. For years I thought if I just kept everything intact. His drawer, his boots by the door. The land. We'd stay whole somehow. But whole and silent are not the same. Around midnight, I stepped into the hallway. The light beneath Brian's door flickered, then went dark. He had returned to her. Of course he had. I didn't blame him. Not fully. Love has a strange way of bending logic, and Rachel, for all her cruelty, was not a stranger to charm. I pulled on my coat and stepped out back. The grass was wet beneath my slippers. The moon hung low, yellow like an old bruise. The rosemary bushes had grown wild. Henry used to trim them every spring, saying, "Let it breathe, Dee. Let it have shape." And I knelt and pulled a few weeds from the base. The earth was damp, generous. "You'd hate this mess," I whispered to no one. Then I sat there. Just sat, on the damp edge of the planter box, and I thought about the land. The documents were safe. But the people, fractured. Brian had come close tonight, but close isn't enough when someone's already drifting. I pulled out a small notepad from my coat, the one I kept for grocery lists and thoughts too tender to say aloud, and I started writing, not to Rachel, not even to Brian. To the next generation. "If you're reading this," I wrote, "then you know this farm still stands. Not because no one tried to take it, but because I said no." I paused, listened to the wind curl around the old barn. "I kept it not for pride," I continued, "but for choice, so that no woman, no widow, no grandmother would ever feel invisible again." I didn't know what I would do with the land yet. Sell part of it? Create a trust? Leave it to a school, or children who remember kindness? But I knew my legacy wouldn't be silence. It would be choice. By the time I looked up, the moon had shifted west. The lights in the house were all off. I stood slowly, damp knees, cold palms, warm resolve. And I walked back inside, holding the notepad close to my chest, like it was more than paper, because it was. It was a beginning. The chalkboard was small, just a slab of wood painted black propped against the kitchen pantry. But it did the job. Every Tuesday and Thursday, at 3 o'clock sharp, 6 children from the neighborhood came knocking. Muddy shoes. Sunburned cheeks. Hungry for more than just knowledge, they called me Mrs. Whitaker. Dolores? Not Brian's mom. Not the old lady on the farm. A Mrs. Whitaker. The name landed on me like warm tea in winter. I'd clear the table, brush off crumbs from my toast, and set out the books. Secondhand readers, multiplication flashcards, a battered atlas from 1998. They didn't care about the age of the pages. They cared that I looked them in the eye, that I remembered their names, that I listened. Sometimes I caught myself using the same phrases Henry once did when explaining a tricky problem. "Let's break it down bit by bit." I'd say, tapping my finger on the page, and they'd lean in. The youngest, Maya, liked to sit closest, her notebook always tilted sideways, her pencil gripped like a paintbrush. One afternoon, she tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "You smell like pancakes and paper." I smiled. That's what wisdom smells like, dear. With their laughter filled the kitchen louder than any holiday had in years. Outside, the land was the same. Dry in summer, generous in spring. The rosemary bush Henry once trimmed now grew wild. I let it, because some things deserve to grow without pruning. I hadn't spoken to Rachel in over 8 months. She and Brian had moved into a rental on the east side. We never argued again, but we never really healed either. And maybe that was okay. Not every wound closes with a hug. Some heal by being left alone. Brian sent a birthday card in May. Just his name, no note. But I kept it on the fridge, beside a crayon drawing Maya gave me of Miss W., a stick figure with gray hair and a cape. I didn't need to be a superhero. I just needed to stay standing, and I had. I signed the papers on a Monday. The lawyer came to the house, same man Henry used decades ago for loan paperwork and boundary surveys. He still wore boaties, still carried everything in a leather satchel that smelled faintly of dust and peppermint. We sat at the kitchen table while the kids played outside, their voices floating through the open window like birdsong. "You're sure about this?" he asked, tapping the final page. "I'm not leaving it to dust and division," I said. "I'm leaving it to possibility." He nodded, eyes soft. The deed, the land, the house, all of it now belonged to the Whitaker Children's Learning Fund, a trust. A beginning. I'd arranged for a portion of the farm to be used as a seasonal learning garden. The barn would be restored, turned into a community library. And the house, it would remain what it was. A place of lessons, of warmth, of second chances. I watched him drive away. Then I stepped onto the porch, sat down on the swing Henry built. It groaned the same way it always had. Out on the lawn, Maya chased 2 boys around the rosemary bush, her giggles high and wild. "Careful near the beets," I called. They waved unfazed. I let myself smile. No court battle, no revenge. Just a new line drawn, quiet, firm mine. Brian didn't know yet. He might one day, he might not. But this wasn't about them anymore. It was about the next hands that would touch the soil, turn pages in the old library, feel safe in a kitchen full of books and chalk. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the letter Henry once wrote me during our first year on the farm. It was yellowed now, edges curled. "Plant more than you need," it said. "You never know who'll need feeding." I folded it carefully, not with grief, with gratitude. Then I watched the sun dip behind the barn roof, the sky streaked with orange and forgiveness. And for the first time in years, I whispered to the wind, "We're all right now, Henry." And I meant it.